Welcome! Today, we're cracking open an ancient blueprint. And no, it's not for a building, but for an entire nation. We're going to dive into 5 foundational chapters from Deuteronomy that honestly feel like the architectural plans for Israel's whole society, everything from its courtrooms to its battlefields, right as they stood on the edge of a brand new era.
So how in the world do you build a nation from the ground up? Well, according to this plan, you start with the rhythms of worship that basically define time itself. Then you build up the pillars of justice and kingship, but with a really radical twist. After that, you establish your spiritual guides, the priests and prophets, and you create laws around cities and witnesses to protect life. And finally, you define the very principles of warfare. All right, let's get into it.
First up, chapter 16. What's so fascinating here is that the foundation of this new society isn't some political ideology, it's a shared story and a shared rhythm of worship. This chapter sets up a national calendar, a series of festivals designed to bring a scattered people together and constantly reinforce the answer to one question: who are we and where did we come from?
And this is just brilliant. Look at how these 3 major festivals anchor the entire year. They connect the people to their past, their present, and their future. Passover makes them look back to remember their escape from Egypt. The Feast of Weeks is all about the present, celebrating the harvest. And the Feast of Tabernacles, well, that grounds them in humility, having them live in little temporary shelters to remember their journey through the wilderness. It's really a masterclass in building a collective memory.
But here's where the blueprint gets really interesting. Worship isn't just kept inside the sanctuary. The text immediately pivots from these sacred calendars right to the streets, to the very foundation of civil society, justice. And the commands, they're absolute, non-negotiable. It's not just, hey, appoint some judges, it's a warning that bribes blind the eyes of the wise, and that you have to chase after justice, and only justice. The core principle is hammered home. You simply cannot separate your relationship with God from how you treat other people.
Okay, so let's move to the next part of this blueprint. Chapter 17 builds on this foundation of justice. It creates a sort of legal hierarchy, and then, get this, lays out one of the most radical job descriptions for a king you'll find anywhere in the ancient world.
The text treats idolatry as a capital crime, like a fundamental betrayal of the entire national agreement. But here's the twist. For what they consider the most serious crime, the law gives the strongest protection to the person accused. No single person could get you convicted. You needed the testimony of 2 or even 3 independent witnesses. This rule was like a firewall against personal vendettas and false accusations. It made sure justice was carefully, meticulously verified.
And this slide just lays it out so perfectly. I mean, think about it. Unlike all the kings around them, who are all about amassing power, wealth, and influence, the Israelite king had serious limits. He was forbidden from stockpiling horses, which was all about military might. He couldn't multiply wives, which were basically political deals that could lead him astray, and he couldn't just hoard wealth. Instead, his main job was to be one of the people, chosen by God, and this is huge, to handwrite his own copy of the law and read it every single day. The point is crystal clear. The king was not above the law. He was its chief student.
So, if the king isn't the ultimate authority, then who provides the spiritual guidance? Well, chapter 18 introduces 2 key roles: the priests, who took care of the formal worship system, and the prophets, who served as God's direct messengers.
The role of the prophet was absolutely crucial. You have to remember, the ancient world was saturated with stuff like divination, sorcery, and talking to spirits, all things that are explicitly forbidden here. So the prophet was God's only authorized channel of communication. The promise is, I will put my words in his mouth. This created a direct, clear line for guidance, a total contrast to the murky and forbidden pagan practices all around them.
But of course, a role this powerful is also dangerous. What about false prophets? I mean, how could an ordinary person possibly tell the difference? The text gives a remarkably simple and practical test. It really boils down to 2 steps. Step 1, are they speaking in the name of the God of Israel? And step 2, does what they say is going to happen actually happen? If their prophecy fails, the text says they've spoken presumptuously. It's a clear, no-nonsense, results-based test for truth.
Okay, so let's see how this blueprint scales down from the big picture. Chapter 19 brings the focus from kings and prophets right back to the community level, with laws designed to protect human life and make sure things are fair in court. It's a really powerful section on justice that's also full of mercy.
This chapter forces us to ask a really fundamental question, one that our own legal systems still wrestle with today. Is all killing murder? And Deuteronomy's answer is a clear no. It all comes down to one thing: intent.
This slide lays out the difference perfectly.
The text gives this vivid example. A guy's out chopping wood. The axe head flies off the handle and accidentally kills his neighbor. There was no hatred beforehand. For him, a city of refuge is set up. It's a safe haven from the avenger of blood. But for a person who acts out of hate, who plans it out, for them there's no refuge. It's a system that provided mercy for accidents while making sure intentional murder faced the full weight of the law.
And here it is again, that vital legal principle, but now it's applied to all sins and crimes. One witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity. The fact that it's repeated just underscores how important it was. This was the absolute bedrock of due process. It shielded citizens from malicious or just plain mistaken single testimonies and made sure that legal matters were established on a solid foundation of evidence.
Finally, we get to the blueprint's instructions for war in chapter 20. And, maybe a little surprisingly, the chapter doesn't kick off with a call to arms or some grand strategy for conquest. It actually begins with words of reassurance. This is the central theme, right here. It's the pre-battle speech for every single conflict. Before any fighting starts, the priest addresses the army, and his job is to reframe their fear. He tells them, don't be afraid of their numbers, their horses, their chariots. Why? Because victory doesn't depend on your strength, but on God's presence with you. The focus is immediately shifted from human power to divine reliance.
What comes next is truly remarkable for any ancient military code. The officers were supposed to announce exemptions from battle. If you just built a house, planted the vineyard, or got engaged, you could go home. Life's big moments were valued. And then there's the last one. Anyone who is fearful and faint-hearted is also dismissed, so their fear doesn't spread. This shows an astonishing concern not just for family and property, but for the psychological state of the soldiers.
The rules of engagement also had some very specific limits. For distant cities, a formal offer of peace had to be made first. War was the last resort. And during a siege, there's this fascinating environmental ethic at play. You could not cut down fruit-bearing trees to build your siege equipment. The text's reasoning is just so practical. Are the trees of the field human that they should be besieged by you? They're a source of food for you and for the future. Now, we do have to address a really difficult command in this chapter. The text makes a clear distinction for the nations located inside the Promised Land itself. For these specific groups, a much harsher instruction was given. The reason stated in the text itself is explicitly theological. It was to prevent the Israelites from adopting the idolatrous practices of those nations, which are described as abominations, because that would completely break their covenant with God. So from sacred festivals to the rules of kinship, from witness protection to the ethics of war, Deuteronomy 16 through 20 gives us this stunningly detailed blueprint. It's a vision of a society built on shared memory, on justice, and on a deep dependence on God. And it leaves us with a question to really think about. In a world so different from the ancient one, how do these principles of justice, leadership, and community challenge our own societies today?